Hello and welcome to the series of conversations with Amartya. He is one of the world's foremost thinkers. The range, the depth, the subtlety of his work on economics, social issues, philosophy, and much else besides earned him the Nobel Prize in 1998. So it's always a pleasure to listen to what Professor Sen has to say on issues of global interest and global concern. But there are two other reasons why this conversation is so special. It coincides with the celebrations of Professor Sen's 75th birthday. And the conversation is taking place in Shanti, Niketan, the seat of learning founded by Rabindranath Tagore, where Professor Sen was born and where he had his early education. Today's discussion focuses on themes that were developed in a report called Civil Paths to Peace. It was commissioned by the Commonwealth, and this Commonwealth Commission on Respect and Understanding was chaired by Professor Sen. Today, we shall discuss issues related to dialogue and multilateralism. Professor Sen, time and again in this report, you stress the importance of human rights, liberties, gender equality, the rule of law, and a political culture that promotes transparency, accountability, and economic development. However, when you look at the map of the world today, there are not too many places where these factors are at play, or if they are at play, they are in an extremely uneven manner.
Yeah.
How do you explain this? Don't you think that it is still power, economic, social, cultural power, that continues to shape the destinies of peoples and nations?
Well, I think economic, social, and political power is, of course, extraordinarily important. But the championing of rights and issues of liberty and the importance of civil paths, our report is called Civil Paths to Peace, I think that is a big counterforce, and that counterforce is working across the world, not just for peace, but everywhere, since your question is general. I mean, if you think about right now, I mean, we are we celebrated on the 10th of December of 2008, the 60th year of the signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations, by a very young United Nations. Now, if you think about the things that happened across the world, how often it has been invoked, it's a big thing. I mean, that is the battle we have, whether it's the battle for political and civil rights in China, or fight against continued child undernourishment in India, or the big issues of democracy and legal as well as generally accepted ethical rights in Pakistan, and comprehensive battle against the denial of these rights in Burma or Sudan, or the Guantanamo Bay imprisonment, not being allowed to move the U.S. court, but coming in with some kind of general perspective, or battles in Europe connected with the rights of immigrants, or only last year, as it were, battles against military dictatorships in Latin America. I think the dialogue of human rights and the importance of human freedom, I think that's that big as a resistance. So you're absolutely right that these other forces are in play and in dominance. But to the extent that human rights, thinking about it, could make a big difference, I think that is a hugely important mechanism, hugely important tool. I think the UN may not have fully recognized how much they were releasing, because they tended to think of the Declaration of Human Rights as a template for legal changes in the world. But in fact, it's come not just through legal changes, that too, like the European Convention of Human Rights and so on, but also in terms of social agitation, naming and shaming, media public discussion. As a former editor and still involved in newspaper, recognize the power of the media. And all these do bring in these concerns, I think, in a big way. So I don't think that it is a powerless tool. It's the power of the weak.
One line in the report states, and I quote, "We can show respect to others without arguing with their particular doctrines or their actions." But how do you do that when you have individuals and groups who subscribe to what I'd like to call totalitarian doctrines and who believe in violence as an instrumentality to achieve their objectives?
Yeah, I think we make clear that we do that statement on, it's a report, and there are various people with different points of view. That is recognizing that we are not going to bash people's religious beliefs, or for that matter, even their civil convictions, if they strongly feel about that. But we do discuss why the path of violence is not one that's protected by that. Anything that goes against the rights of others is suspect, and indeed, in the name of protecting rights, you cannot give a person a right to disrupt the rights of others. So, in some ways, I think if you look at the totality of the report, I think that concern, which is a legitimate one, I'm glad you raised that, would have been addressed in a big way.
Things, of course, are even more complicated when you have groups which put faith above reason, above law. And I mentioned India in particular. When, for example, a certain Hindu militant right-wing group or groups destroyed the Babri Mosque, the entire argument was this is a matter of faith.
Well, yes, but I think, yes, but it's a matter of some people's faith against other people's faith. So, as you know, that's not the position has been of the courts have not been to defend them, and indeed, nor has the public opinion in India been censorious. In fact, the party that took that action actually suffered, I think, considerably electorally as a result of that action. And ultimately, it's the involvement of the majority in protecting minority rights that we have to look at. No, I think it's certainly a big issue that that in the name of faith lots of things are done. And when we say that we are not into the business of correcting religious beliefs, we are into the business of resisting the use of faith to disrupt the faiths of normal lives or the normal liberties of other human beings. And I think that's written very much. I think basically the main approach of the report is to take us away a little, the title Civil Paths to Peace indicate, from seeing the military option and busting the enemy as the main way of doing it, which is what happened in Iraq, for example. That is, instead, that was a unilateral action based, as it happened, on fairly wrong reading of what was going on in Iraq. It was a hugely counteractive thing, not least for the people who led it, namely the United States and its immediate allies. But I think the whole approach, aside from those mistakes about weapons of mass destruction, whether Al-Qaeda was in Iraq, whether Iraq was connected with 9/11 in 2001 and so on, aside from all those mistakes, and aside from the mistake of proceeding, into it without giving a chance to determine and solve this question, I think there are two big things that happened which are disturbing. One is that it was a very unilateral move, and the whole approach of the Commonwealth is multilateral, and anything that can be done on the basis of conversation, and then proceed. I don't think we fault the operation in Afghanistan because that is a battling move. But it was a battling move adopted in the United Nations on the basis of consultation of all the parties involved, with the exception of the Taliban, which of course were directly involved, the Al-Qaeda was directly involved in the 9/11. The other thing is that this whole idea that you can address terrorism only through military might is, I think, a mistake, and I think that's one of the main points of the report, that there are other ways of addressing it. That doesn't mean that the military option is never to be used. It can be used as a last resort. But it's very important to see that the seeds of discontent, and you were mentioning earlier about how often faith is used for the purpose of violence. But those require changes in schooling. Those require informed culture, involve activism of the media, and really the hundreds of ways in which civil society could make a difference. It's that which we are mainly concentrating on, because that could bring about a big change in which the need for military action, without eliminating it, could be very considerably reduced and very substantially, maybe even in some cases completely eliminated. I think it's that hope, and a hope based on fairly tough reasoning, I would say, that the report tried to present.
Yeah, the difficulty really arises because you have terrorist groups who will not want a dialogue. I mean, their objectives are very clear, and they will not engage. Obviously, there have been examples to the contrary. I think what happened in Nepal last year was significant, where you had the entire Maoist thing brought to the mainstream. But by and large, I have seen no sign that, let's say, Al-Qaeda has given
and I think there's no reason. I think that the Nepal Maoists are a very special group in many ways. And, they haven't had so much success with the Shining Path in Latin America, though in many ways they're similar. No, I don't think that it's really not the dialogue with the terrorists that we have in mind. But, for every active terrorist, there are about 600 people who are involved in one way, if only by tolerating it. One of the peculiar things is that by the terrorist propaganda, by the exploitation of inequalities in the world, by the humiliation of the past, often by the West, of non-Western dominated countries, they have been able to generate a situation whereby the most peaceful of people would justify and tolerate the most horrendous violent action on grounds of retaliatory action. I think that's where we have to, that dialogue comes in. It's not so much that the terrorists themselves would change. But then again, there are the hardcore terrorists, and then the younger boys and girls who are selected, who give their lives as suicide bombers, and they are recruited young before they can think very clearly. Sometimes the families, in fact, don't act as a barrier, but push them along. And it's that generic cultivation of violence by hardcore terrorists that we wanted to fight against. And it's not so much the hardcore terrorists, but the hardcore terrorists are very tiny in number. They have a huge influence by the complicity of a society which has been trained to think in certain ways. And terrorism begins in the mind in some ways, and the terrorists are cultivated through the cultivating of the mind. And it's the resistance there on which we have to concentrate. And that's this thing. I don't think we expect that Mr. Osama bin Laden would read this book. And I was amused when my book, Identity and Violence, came out. I think the reviewer of Spectator, who was very kind to me, said he wanted to send a copy of that to Osama bin Laden. Now, I didn't quite hope, didn't really, I would have been pleased if that converted him, but I think it's extremely unlikely it would have any impact on him.
But mind you, this again is something that has bothered many of us, that even in a dialogue to contain terrorism's psychological effects, many governments increasingly turn to religious leaders. And it is the secular, non-religious ones who don't really find a voice. I mean, I've seen this happen in India very often, that you reach out to so-called spiritual leaders.
I know. I think this is a huge mistake. And, I think this has happened to some extent in India, but it's happened in a much bigger extent in Britain, I think. And I do think that it was a huge mistake, and I'm on record on that, of trying to counter the UK government's attempt to counter Islamist terrorism by trying to recruit the mullahs on your side.
That's it.
I think what it does is that it suddenly increased the voice of the mullahs, made religion much more important, contributed to a situation in which religion was rising anyway as far, and gave it a huge fillip. I was on whatever it was, 6th of July or so on, 2005, when there were these bombs were going out in the undergrounds in London. There was a Bangladeshi friend of mine, secular Bangladeshi, fought in the liberation movement for having a secular Bangladesh, and member of the Labour Party. And he said that he was listening to the appeal by the government that you could not, that this is the time for the Muslims to put their house in order. And he said, you know, my government, that is UK government since he's a UK citizen, my government wants me to act not as a British citizen, not as a member of the Labour Party, not as a member of the British civil society, not as a member of a secular Bangladeshi culture, not as a member of the fighting force, namely in the war in 1971, War of Independence, fighting for secularism, but as a Muslim, because my ancestry is that, and act through that. And there is something bizarre about this way of looking at it. Now, I'm saying all that on my individual capacity, obviously, as chair of that commission. You know, we had to, everyone had to agree on a position which would be agreed and not offensive to anyone. But I thought that, and we do say something on that. You'd see if you read the report, we do say that this idea of using religion as a kind of counter move is not a very intelligent move. I personally would have probably taken a stronger position, as indeed I have in my own writing. And I think it is very big, and I'm really delighted you raised that issue, because it's very tempting to say, well, these people are all Muslims, and therefore, why don't you work through the Muslim clerics?